Good afternoon. My name is Howard Ramsey. This is the second of We Are Strathclyde's Google Hangouts for 2017. I'm joined today by two colleagues. I have Ian McClellan, who is the Student Support and Wellbeing Manager at Strathclyde, and by Lorna McNally, the Business Faculty Librarian. Thanks very much for both coming along. Ian, Student Support and Wellbeing Manager, what does that mean?
Well, that means I manage some of the university's services to support students to help them get through their degree successfully. So what we're talking about there is things like financial support, study skills, counselling, student health.
Okay, and how long have you been doing this at Strathclyde?
4.5 years.
4.5 years, great. Okay, so Lorna, Business Faculty Librarian, suggests you're the librarian for the Business Faculty.
I am the librarian for the Business Faculty. There's a librarian for each of the faculties here at Strathclyde, as well as lots of other staff in the library to help make sure that all the resources are there for the students on their reading lists, and we run classes to make sure they know how to use all of our different databases and things.
Okay, and how long have you been at Strathclyde?
I've been at Strathclyde for 4 years.
4 years? Very good. Okay, so I've asked you around about what actually student support and wellbeing is. You've covered a couple of the areas that's in. I'm aware that one area that we were talking about before we started was study skills.
Mm-hmm.
You said to me then that you felt that was one of the less used support areas in the university. Can you say maybe one or two thoughts that you might have around why that might be?
Yeah, I think it's interesting looking at some of the responses that we've had from participants about independent study, and people are clearly very switched on to the fact that everybody studies in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
What our study skills support service is for is to help students develop the skills you need to study effectively, and I think a lot of students take those skills for granted. So it would sound quite odd if I said that we teach people about reading, because if you're at university you know how to read, obviously, but actually there are different ways of approaching reading material, and there are techniques you can develop to help you get through. For example, a big intimidating reading list can actually be a lot less intimidating if you know how to approach that properly. So those are the kind of skills that our service offers development in. And I think a lot of students underestimate quite how important that is in successfully studying.
Okay. You mentioned quite a range of services that you manage, and you can see how there are connections between the library there as well. You talk about reading lists and how to actually manage a reading list. In terms of the services that you manage, which would you say are the most used or the most in demand by students?
I think it depends on which group of students you're talking about. So a lot of students use our student financial support service. So we have an emergency loan facility, for example. A lot of students find that they need short-term help with cash. We also have a range of hardship funds. So a lot of students find at some point in their maybe 4 years at the university they'll need to use that service. A lot of other students use our international student support service. Nearly all our international students will need some support from that service at some point in their time with us. But students also receive support from those services without really realising. So using those services doesn't just mean turning up and speaking to an advisor or going to a workshop. We also produce online information. There's information on My Place. There's information that will be emailed to students. So you will be receiving support from those services whether you actively seek them out or not. Okay,
but if a student was to seek them out online, are there sensible starting points for them to find out about what's available?
Yeah, actually, this might sound a bit odd, but the university's search facility on its webpage is actually really good. So rather than give you a web address, I would say search for student financial support, and we'll be there. We'll be top of the list.
So that was a stupid question there. Fair enough. Okay. We also, before we came on, talked about the disability service. And students without a disability may not be aware of the support in place for students who have a declared disability. And we talked about the difference between a declared disability, where the institution, the university, has been formally told, and an undeclared one, where a student may have a disability and it may be affecting their ability to study, but they haven't informed the university. Is there anything you can tell us around that?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say anyone who has a long-term health issue, for example, or any kind of sensory impairment, or has experienced any kind of learning difficulty, for example, dyslexia, or suspects that dyslexia might be an issue for them, should get in touch with the disability service. If someone has been medically diagnosed with a condition, then at any point in your university career you can declare that to us, and we'll then look at the support that needs to be put in place. If you are struggling with, for example, aspects of study and you think, actually I've often wondered if dyslexia was an issue for me, then we can give you advice about maybe getting a test, or indications of whether a test would be an appropriate route for you to go down. So what I would say is, whether you've declared a disability on your application to university or not, if you feel that that service is relevant to you, at any point you can declare a disability, and we can then take forward the kind of support that you need.
That's
Can
great.
I add in, at the library we've got an assistive technologies room in the library, so
Right.
we work closely with the disability service to supply whether it's software or hardware that's needed for those students depending on the disability.
Okay, so by assistive software, what exactly, for example, are these?
Well, again, if it's with dyslexia, we have different software, there's different programmes. Ian's probably more familiar with what's actually needed with different JAWS or different reading software available for students.
Okay, great. Lorna, you said you'd been through the comments that have been produced by students through the week in the discussions. Do you have any feedback about what you've been coming across?
I do. There was lots of comments, I think, about this, independent learning. People were amazed at how big the library was, and that was quite novel for them. Maybe coming from school or college, their libraries were much smaller. But it also pointing out that there's so many different zones available in the library. If it's quiet study, silent study, or group work, so much work is done now in groups in university that the library's got really great facilities for doing that group work. Some are bookable, so you can book them in advance, and others are just first come, first served, term on. And a lot of people were saying about when they like to do their study, be it in the morning, afternoon, evening. Again, once we get into term time, the library's open really extensive hours. We're open from 7 a.m. till midnight during term time, Monday to Friday, and even 24-hour study at exam time. So when it comes to exam times, the library's open 24 hours. Okay.
When you were a student yourself, how did you prefer to study?
Gosh, that's some time ago now. You're asking that when I was a student. Funnily enough, when I was a student, most of my work was independent work, one-off essays that had to be submitted, but just towards the end of my degree they were introducing group work. Personally, I prefer to study in the library. I like that quiet space to do my work. But when I was meeting with group people at the end, it was more a question of getting people together at the right time and finding sociable spaces to work. At that time, and it is some time ago when I was a student, libraries didn't really cater for the group work, and that's a big difference now. You'll see that coming into libraries nowadays, that there's so many spaces available for you to chat with your friends and have a more sociable interaction.
Very different from my days.
Very different from my day.
While we're on the subject, Ian, you're currently a student.
I am.
In addition to your full-time job, how do you prefer to study in the way that Lorna's covered?
Well, I think I'm probably quite a good example of how individual circumstances determine how you study. So I do most of my studying at home. My studying is quite specialist. But what I would say is, even though I'm not physically visiting the library very often, I'm using library resources all the time. So what I'm doing is I'm using the online resources, I'm downloading electronic resources, and that's a fantastic development in library services that a lot of students who are coming direct from school are maybe not as familiar with, is that there are lots of library resources that you don't need to physically visit the library to use.
That's true. Don't think of the library just as the physical space. Although last year we had over 1 million visits to the library.
Right, okay.
Yeah, so it was a really popular place for people to come.
The population of Glasgow is...
No, it was all those students coming in, backing out. But Ian's absolutely right. Don't forget about the digital library, if you like. We have all these resources all available to you from anywhere. Don't have to be on campus. You just need your DS username and password to get access.
You touched on the size and scope of the physical library, and I'm aware there are tours, although some departments also do tours, so what's the difference?
Some do. So again, some departments, for example, at the moment we've got the PGDE, the teachers coming in just now. They start a little bit earlier than the rest of the term. So those departments get in touch with us and we provide tours specifically for them. But there are general tours available. We're actually running some pre-sessional ones. So if you want to come and find out about the library while it's still quite quiet, relatively, In the next couple of weeks, just check on the library website and you'll be able to see times for those tours. And once we get into the start of the semester, again, the first few weeks we'll be running tours throughout the day. Really, people can come and sign up for those, or just turn up and see when they're available.
Great. I heard there was news about the National Student Survey and the library.
There was great news last week. We are the top university library in Scotland.
Very good, congratulations.
So the students, and that's the student satisfaction survey. So we're really proud of the fact that it's actually the students who voted that. We're a friendly bunch. Come and see us. We won't tell you to shush, what people might expect libraries used to be. Of course, other students might tell you to shush if you're in the silent area. But we are really proud that we're top, and it's because we make a lot of effort in making the students feel welcome. We've got the library tour, the video, that people will have seen the game just to get them familiar with the library. Some of the top tips from our library staff as well were great. Just come and see us.
Okay, that's great. I've got a more general question for both of you. From your experience in your two areas, what is the biggest challenge faced by new incoming undergraduate first year students at Strathclyde? Laura, any thoughts?
Oh, I think it could just be the feeling of being overwhelmed there's so much that you have to do for yourself. As Ian touched on, in the past you're maybe told where to go and what to do by teachers or lecturers at college, so it really is, it's up to you now to start getting those reading materials and start doing that work for yourself. And so I do think a sense of being overwhelmed can be one of them.
Thank you. Similar from your point of view, or something different you would add to that?
I would certainly agree. I'd also add, I think that socially it can be quite challenging because you're in a new environment, and there's a lot of new opportunities. What I would say, and it was a piece of advice somebody gave me before I started university many years ago, and I think it still applies, and that is that when you first arrive at university, you'll see lots of people walking around with great purpose, looking like they really know what they're doing, and they'll be terribly confident that they've been here a day longer than you. And it's all a front, it's a bluff. As long as you understand that everybody's just as terrified as you are, then everyone is working on building their confidence and understanding actually that everybody you come into contact with at the university, students in later years of study, staff, we've all been through the same thing. We know what it's like. We know it can be a bit overwhelming. I think that transition to more independent study can be a challenge for some students. I think the transition for students who are living away from home, the transition to independent living can be quite a challenge. I think it's great if you've learned how to use a washing machine and how to cook food for yourself before you leave home. But it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity to find out more about yourself. It's an opportunity to make connections with people, like-minded people, to find people that you'd never have come across at school. And we are an international university, so there's a real opportunity to experience friendships across lots of different cultures, from different nationalities. And there are students who leave Strathclyde who 10 or 20 years later say, my best friends are still the people I went to university with, and they're all over the world.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I was just going to pick up a comment, because there was one student I noticed during the week, I think it's Emily McElhatton, she'd written that Strathclyde hadn't been her first choice of university, but that she was now so glad that she was coming here because she'd seen all of the support that's available to her. And I think that itself, just having done this course, being aware that there's help for you, don't let it make you feel overwhelmed, and make sure that you do access all the services that are for you. So well done, Emily. We're glad that you're coming too.
Great. I was going to finish by asking you for one single piece of advice from either your own experience as a student or your own experience working here. And Ian, you may feel you've kind of given that, because what you said about seeing the person who's been here for one day more than me rang very true for myself. And that's possibly just from doing my job, never mind from actually being a student. If you get any more to add to that, fine, and I can ask Laura in the meantime while you have a think though.
One of the comments that I was reading in the from the students this week said that it's a really good idea to greatly overestimate everything that you do, and I genuinely think that's a really good piece of advice. However long you think it's going to take you to do a piece of work or your reading, overestimate that, or give yourself targets to meet so that you've still got plenty of time afterwards. for the real deadline. So I think that's a good piece of advice.
Okay, that's good. That's nice concrete advice. Anything you want to add, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say first and foremost, give it time. So everyone is making a transition, and you're not going to know your way around campus and your way around your subject and everything that you're doing by the end of the first week. You need a bit of time to settle in and to find your space, your niche. Reflecting on what a lot of the participants have said about independent study, I think another thing that's really important is you need to find what works for you. And what works for your friend from school, or your friends on a different course, or the person that you're sharing a flat with might not work for you. You might be a morning study person, they might be a night owl. Find what works for you. And I think be aware that this is a big transition, but it doesn't need to be scary, and there's lots and lots of opportunities there to join university clubs and societies, try a sport you've never done before. Which brings me on to the last thing I would say, and that is that the most successful students, in my view, are those that achieve a balance. So we all know that a lot of students in their first few weeks at university, well, the balance might be more towards having a good time and less towards studying, let me put it that way. But over time, it's really important to achieve a balance. So devoting adequate time to your studies so that you're doing as well as you feel you can is really important. But studying 24/7 isn't healthy.
No.
So you need a balance there. You need some activities outside of study, whether it's socialising or a sport or whatever it is that you do that helps you relax, helps you de-stress. Find the balance that works for you, not necessarily the balance that works for anybody else. Okay,
brilliant. Thanks very much. That's really good, practical, common sense advice, I think. That's all we've got time for this week, so I'd just like to thank Ian and Lorna for coming along this week, and we'll be back again next week. Thanks very much.